Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour.
Welcome to the technical briefing on the second phase of the Solid Waste Master Plan. Bienvenue à la séance d'information technique relative. Désolée, j'ai perdu ma connexion. Relative à la deuxième phase du plan directeur de la gestion.
On the second phase of the Solid Waste Management Plan.
Your moderator today. Je serai votre modératrice pour aujourd'hui. Scott Moffatt, Chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management, will provide some remarks and introduce city staff. Scott Moffatt, président du Comité permanent de la protection de l'environnement, de l'eau et de la gestion des déchets, introduira les présentateurs aujourd'hui. Today's presentation will be just under 1 hour long. Following staff presentations, Chair Moffatt will also moderate a question and answer session with members of council and their staff. Après les présentations, Président Moffatt animera une période de questions en compagnie des membres du conseil municipal et de leurs employés. 15 minutes after the end of the technical briefing, I will moderate a question and answer session for the media. 15 minutes suivant la fin de la séance d'information, je présiderai ensuite une autre période de questions destinée aux médias. Before I pass things over to Chair Moffatt, I'd like to go over a few items. If you've joined on your computer, you can choose who you'd like to watch. If you'd like to watch the English or French presentation by using the screen view toggle at the top of the screen. You can also pin an interpreter onto your screen for the meeting. Si vous êtes sur votre ordinateur, vous pouvez choisir de visionner la présentation en anglais ou en français en cliquant le bouton Screen View au-dessus de votre écran. Vous pouvez aussi sauvegarder un interprète de votre choix sur votre écran pour la rencontre. Please do not use the Zoom chat and please turn off your camera when you are not speaking, as the chat and participants with their cameras on will be visible on the live stream. After the presentation, to view the city official who is speaking on Zoom, please put your view on speaker view instead of gallery view. The button for this is located at the top right corner of the Zoom video screen. Après les présentations, vous pouvez changer votre écran au mode speaker en anglais pour pouvoir mieux voir les porte-paroles. Le bouton est situé en haut à la droite de la portion vidéo de l'écran. I will now pass things over to Councillor Scott Moffatt, Chair of the Standing Committee on Environmental Protection, Water and Waste Management, who will begin today's briefing.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for being here today. I'd like to say hello to fellow councillors, members of Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee, staff, and media. Thanks so much for joining us today for this virtual technical briefing, where we'll discuss the second phase of our Solid Waste Master Plan, our 30-year plan for how we manage waste, solid waste, in the city of Ottawa. As you might recall, last April, we presented phase 1 of our plan to you in the city's first ever virtual technical briefing. And here we are, so many months later, still meeting virtually. But we've managed, and we're still getting work done, including the important work within the Solid Waste Master Plan, including virtual consultations with residents and stakeholders. So today, we're going to hear about the Phase 2 report, as I mentioned, which seeks council approval of the vision, guiding principles, and goals of the master plan to guide the work to follow in the rest of Phase 2 and in Phase 3. Staff will also provide an overview of the city's future waste management needs, along with a long list of options, 72 to be exact, to support waste management and diversion for the next 30 years. So this long list will be evaluated. We'll create a shorter list of suitable options for community and stakeholder engagement this fall. One of the key items that we need to consider when assessing future waste needs in Ottawa is the lifespan of the trail waste facility, landfill. We'll receive an update today on the life of the landfill during this presentation and in the report. Today's presentation will be delivered by Shelley McDonald, who is the Acting Director of Solid Waste Services, and Nicole Hoover-Bianash, who is the Program Manager of Long-Term Planning. Also with us today are Kevin Wiley, who is the General Manager of Public Works Environmental Services, Andrea Gay-Farley, who is the Program Manager for Program Planning, and key members of the master plan's technical consulting team. They will all be available for you if you have any questions following the presentation, and for councillors and for media. So I'm going to hand it now over to Shelley McDonald, who will start our presentation.
Thank you, Chair, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. As Chair mentioned, my name is Shelley McDonald. I'm the Acting Director of Solid Waste Services. Today I'm with Nicole Hoover-Bianash, who's the Program Manager of Long-Term Planning, who will lead us through the majority of the presentation. Also joining us are 3 members of the core project team, members of HDR and Dilling Technical Consulting team supporting the master plan's development. Beth Godger, Waste Management Consultant with Dilling Consulting, Larry Fedek, Solid Waste Program Lead with HDR Consulting, and Betsy Vargas, Technical Services and Project Lead with Dilling Consulting. The purpose of today's technical briefing is to brief members of Council on the Phase 2 Solid Waste Master Plan report, which will be tabled for Committee and Council consideration on June 29th and July 7th, respectively. May I have the next slide, please? Excellent. The presentation today will include an overview of the background on the Solid Waste Master Plan and where we are at with our journey, an overview of Phase 2 and the report recommendations, the proposed vision statement, guiding principles and goals for the master plan, an analysis of the city's long-term waste management needs, including waste projections through 2052, a long list of options that could help us meet those needs. The process staff will follow to evaluate all the options and to develop 2 potential waste management systems, one moderate and one aggressive, that will go out for consultation this fall. Then we will outline the next steps and finally take questions. Next slide, please. We'll start with a brief refresher on the 3-phased approach Council approved in 2019 to develop the Solid Waste Master Plan. Next slide, please. As you can see from the slide, we've come a long way since Council first approved the roadmap and framework for developing the city's new solid waste master plan in the middle of 2019. And we're now about 2/3 the way through the plan's development. As you recall, Phase 1 provided Council with a baseline of information for discussion and consideration in future phases, and also informed Council of what tools are available to influence the city's waste management system and programs. It also recommended a 3-series approach for public and stakeholder consultation and engagement. We moved into Phase 2 last year and began our first series of discussions with the community and our key stakeholders to help inform the development of the proposed vision, goals, and guiding principles that will provide a framework for the waste plan. As well, that important feedback was instrumental for developing the Phase 2 technical deliverables, including informing the identification of the city's future waste management needs, the long list of available options to meet those needs that also align with the proposed vision, goals, and guiding principles, and the development of an evaluation process that will be used to assess options and narrow them down to a short list of options suitable for Ottawa. This brings us to where we are today in the master planning process, providing members of Council with an update on the work done to date in Phase 2, seeking Council approval of the waste plan's proposed vision, guiding principles and goals, and providing an overview of next steps. With 3 series of engagement included throughout the process, consultation with residents and stakeholders underpins all stages of development of the waste plan. I will now hand it over to Nicole Hoover-Bianash, who will walk you through the work done to date in Phase 2, where we are going.
Great, thank you so much, Shelley, and thank you, Chair Moffatt, and good afternoon, everyone. So before diving into the core content of today's technical briefing, I just wanted to highlight that today's presentation will be high level, despite taking about 45 minutes to walk you through the material today. But the intent is to provide an overview of what Council can expect to see in the Phase 2 report. So there's been a lot of technical work that has taken place over the past year since we were last in front of Committee and Council. As such, I just wanted to acknowledge there is quite a comprehensive staff report that will be released following today's technical briefing, with a lot of reading, of course. But I wanted to offer up the opportunity that Of course, in addition to after today's technical briefing, that staff are available to discuss any of the material for members of committee and council between today's technical briefing and the lead up to committee on June 29th. And of course, we'll available at committee to answer any questions that members of council may have. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, and then next slide. Great, thank you. So the phase 2 report's purpose is twofold. First and foremost, this report presents council with a proposed vision, guiding principles, and goals that will set the overarching strategic framework for how the city will manage solid waste, increase diversion, and extend the life of the landfill over the next 30 years. So these proposed strategic elements of the waste plan were developed in collaboration both with the general public and also a number of key stakeholders, including our project stakeholder sounding board and the project's councillor sponsors group. So just as a refresher and reminder, our councillor sponsors group, we have Chair Moffatt, Vice Chair Menard, Councillors El-Shantiri, Councillors Dudas, and a representative from the Mayor's office. So thanking them, they've been instrumental in helping strategically guide the work to date. So overall, this approach was undertaken to ensure that the strategic framework and the direction for the plan would be reflective of community beliefs and values, and thus honoring a commitment that we made to council to ensure that we develop this plan in unison with the community. So in terms of why now, why we're seeking council's approval of these strategic elements at this juncture of the waste planning process is to ensure that council strategic priorities are defined to help guide the work that's going to follow in the rest of phase 2 and also into phase 3. So as we work to develop the draft as well as the final waste plan and ensuring that it will align and work to achieve council's direction and vision for the future of waste management over the next 30 years. So secondly, the report will also provide members of council with an update on progress to date in the development of phase 2 of the waste plan. So I know the chair and Shelley touched on it at a high level, but this includes an overview of key technical work, including the city's future waste management needs, gaps, constraints, and opportunities, along with a long list of options available to meet the future needs and support the goals of the waste plan, and the triple bottom line technical evaluation process that will be used to evaluate and shortlist the options for community and stakeholder engagement this fall. Next slide, please. So before we dive into the proposed strategic framework and the overview of the technical work that was undertaken in phase 2, I just want to build on the chair's comments and Shelley's comments earlier regarding community and stakeholder engagement. So extensive engagement did underpin all the elements of this report. We worked hand in hand with the councillor sponsors group and our stakeholders, both internal and external to the city, and members of the public to ensure that every aspect of this phase of the waste plan incorporated and aligned with council and community priorities and feedback. So during engagement series 1, which took place last spring and into last fall, we undertook a robust engagement approach to ensure that broad-based community engagement was undertaken. So input was sought to provide insight and to help develop the proposed vision, goals, and guiding principles, which I'll be walking members of council through shortly over the next few slides, as well as the future needs and the long list of options that will be tabled as part of the phase 2 report. So throughout today's presentation, I will touch on how stakeholder and community feedback was used in the development of each of these key elements included in the phase 2 report. So the tactics for engagement series 1 were designed in a way to encourage participation and also to ensure that we were able to reach a broad range of residents. It included key stakeholder workshops and surveys, online dialogue sessions, and an online survey for the general public. We hosted a number of virtual focus groups and one-on-one interviews with equity-seeking groups. We also used a variety of promotion tools, including advertising, social media, earned media, and utilizing our network of stakeholders to help share information with their communities. So working through various community associations and agencies to help reach out within their networks. Staff did, of course, have to adjust our planned activities. We did start engagement series 1 right after the pandemic hit, and we had stay-at-home orders in place. So as such, our entire engagement series 1 had to shift to a completely online based engagement and consultation. So despite that, we did receive comments from over 2,800 participants, whether that was through surveys, online meetings, through emails, or comments on the city's Engage Ottawa platform. So the Engage Ottawa survey was one of the most popular tools. We were able to gather feedback from a broad base of residents across the city. And we also had fairly representative feedback in terms of feedback from those living in urban, suburban, and rural communities, and also fairly representative in terms of a breakdown between our curbside households and multi-residential households. So feedback received through the city's internal staff survey that you'll see here as well. There was a lot of interest generated in that, but it did mainly focus on ideas and opportunities to improve waste management in city facilities and city operations. Next slide, please. So in addition to the input received from community and stakeholders, the proposed vision statement, the guiding principles, and the goals were designed to reflect recent and future trends in the waste management industry, as identified through all that really good technical work that took place in phase 1, which of course is transforming how solid waste is managed into the future. It also considered city policies and strategies that are influencing the waste plan's priorities. So such as Council's declaration of a climate emergency and recognition of the important role the future integrated waste management system will have in helping achieve Council's climate change goals. The waste plan's vision will ultimately define where Council wants to be in 30 years with regards to waste management. And it's going to help serve as the inspiration and the framework for the strategic waste planning process. The guiding principles will outline beliefs and define what's important for success. And they'll also help guide staff through the development as well as the implementation of the waste plan. And the goals will define the outcomes that Council wants the waste plan to achieve. And it's going to help transition the vision statement from that more broad-based aspirational statement to more specific direction. Next slide, please. So the long-term strategic for the waste plan that staff are proposing, included here on the slide, is a zero waste Ottawa achieved through progressive, collective, and innovation action. So zero waste itself is considered a philosophy and a call to action, rather than necessarily an absolute target, but it does seek to guide people in changing their lifestyles and practices. So focusing more heavily on waste prevention, reduction, reuse, and recycling over disposal. So it's also generally recognized by policymakers that zero or working towards achieving zero waste requires a concerted effort and coordination between all levels of government, as well as industry, business, and residents as consumers. At the municipal level, this ultimately means that the community and the city, as a collective community, we will need to look at rethinking the traditional approach of managing waste to creating and also supporting opportunities to work towards eliminating waste by recognizing that some of the materials, or a good chunk of the materials that are traditionally discarded of and sent to landfill, are in fact valuable resources. Next slide, please. So staff will be recommending a series of 8 guiding principles that we'll cover on the next 2 slides that are being recommended to clearly define what's important for the success and will inform development and implementation of the waste plan. These guiding principles were identified and emphasized as important by both the community and key stakeholders. The first 4 included on this slide speak to honoring the 5 R's of the waste management hierarchy, seeking to change community values related to waste, and the protection of environment for future generations to come. And the last one, leading by example. So looking for opportunities as a corporation, the City of Ottawa, to incorporate the 5 R's into how we manage waste across our entire operations and within our city facilities. Next slide, please. So the next 4 guiding principles on this slide speak to adopting circular economy principles. So circular economy is a relatively new approach and does represent a paradigm shift from the status quo of approach to managing waste. So it replaces what is more conventional in terms of the linear waste management approach of taking resources, making them into products, and then disposing of them in landfill, with more of a take, make, and return model. So helping create that closed loop system where valuable natural resources are kept in this cycle instead of being disposed of in landfill. So it's based on principles of designing out waste and keeping products and materials in use. So a circular economy emphasizes, very similar to and consistent with a zero waste vision, is it emphasizes waste minimization, reuse, and recycling to ensure that unwanted materials otherwise destined for landfill become inputs for manufacturing processes. So thus reducing our reliance on raw materials and reducing the overall amount of waste requiring disposal. The circular economy is not just about reducing the amount of waste sent to landfill, but it's also about gradually working to decouple economic activity from consumption of finite resources. And it is based on 3 core principles. So designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. So it is recognized within the industry that municipal governments can play a unique role in helping enable that shift to a circular economy through the different legislative and policy tools that we have access to, also including certain mechanisms such as our purchasing power and through our public procurement policies as well as practices. And all of this combined can help bring about a wider system transformation, but very similar to the principles behind the aspirational goal of zero waste, is that success depends on partnership between many sectors. So as a municipality, we will not alone be able to achieve that. We will have to work very closely with the business community, non-governmental organizations, and of course, levels of government, all levels of government. And then lastly, the last 3 guiding principles also cover off on embracing innovation, keeping waste local, of course, when possible, and using a triple bottom line to balance environmental sustainability, city and community desires, as well as fiscal responsibility. Next slide, please. So 11 goals are being recommended for council consideration, which will define the outcomes that council wants to achieve through the waste plan, helping transition the vision from a broad statement to more specific direction. So the first 6 proposed goals that you'll see here on this slide focus on extending the life of the trail road waste facility, reducing waste generation as a community, but also as an organization, reusing more waste, again, focusing on community and organization, and finding opportunities to recover more materials and energy from the garbage stream, and aspiring to reduce the city's waste management system's greenhouse gas emissions by 100%, which aligns with council's climate change targets. Next slide, please. So the last 5 goals also seek to work with other sectors in the community to reduce, reuse, and divert waste, to maximize participation in waste management programs and services, to minimize costs to municipal taxpayers, make sustainable waste management design an essential part of the city's planning process, and to collaborate with external stakeholders to collectively work to advance waste management practices. So with council's approval of the waste plan's vision statement, the guiding principles and goals, staff will be well positioned to continue to work to develop the draft as well as the final waste plan that's going to align and work to achieve council's direction and vision for the future waste management over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. So the next core focus of the Phase 2 report is an update on the key technical work undertaken to date in Phase 2. So including the city's future waste management needs. The needs assessment includes long-term projections that estimate the future quantities of waste that the city will need to manage over the next 30 years as Ottawa's population continues to grow. It also includes a comprehensive needs analysis that took into account the current integrated waste management system, the future amount of waste that will require management over the life of the plan, and also consider the changing legislative landscape, different policies and programs influencing municipal waste management, as well as best practices. It also took into account feedback shared by residents and stakeholders during engagement series 1 with respect to, in particular, what they liked about the current system, but also where they indicated they'd like to see the city improve in the future. So gaps, challenges, and opportunities have been identified for each of the future needs, and they were also compared to the proposed vision statement, guiding principles, and goals to ensure alignment. The team also identified key risks and other key considerations that may impact long-term waste management in the City of Ottawa that need to be contemplated as we continue to develop the waste plan, but also over the term of the next 30 years, and especially as we refresh the master plan on a regular basis every 5 years. Next slide, please. So the city, of course, is growing, and as members of council are very familiar with, the draft new official plan projects that Ottawa will have a population of more than 1.4 million people by 2046. So these additional residents, along with waste generation rates and industry trends, will impact the quantity and composition of waste that the city will need to manage in the future. So understanding how the city's population and waste management needs may change over the next 30 years is fundamental in helping ensure council can make effective and efficient decisions about waste management programs and services. And also to plan for the proper supporting infrastructure, programs, and various contracts into the future. So to do this, the project's technical consulting team developed waste projections to identify the estimated tons of material that will require management by the city over the next 30 years. So take you to 2052. Overall, it is anticipated that the city will need to manage just over 487,000 tons of waste in 2052. So this represents about 37% more waste than in 2020. Like today, single-family households are projected to continue to generate the largest proportion of waste. So that's up to 3/4 of all waste generated in 2052. This will be followed by multi-residential properties, which are predicted to generate nearly 18% of waste, city facilities, nearly 7% of waste, and then parks and public spaces generating less than 1% of the overall amount of waste in 2052. So a couple of things that I just want to highlight in terms of the context when taking a look at these waste projections is that there are a number of different factors that can affect the amount of waste that is generated. And therefore, waste projections, that affect the amount of waste that's generated, and therefore that will have an impact on the waste projections. So this includes changes to household composition, the evolving nature of packaging, consumer purchasing power, the economy, changes in demographics, the severity of climate events. So those are just examples of all the different things that can impact the amount of waste that's generated. And kind of given this, it is next to impossible to speculate the impact that all these different factors will have on the future waste generation with any degree of accuracy. So as such, the model that was used to develop the waste projections can only be based on historical and current information. The projections are based on a statistical analysis of available historical information on how that data can be modeled and projected into the future. Two other things, important things to highlight is that the impacts of the future transition of both the provincial Blue Box program as well as the municipal hazardous and special waste program, that transition to individual producer responsibility was not taken into consideration when modeling out the future or the impact on the city's waste generation. And that's simply because at this point, it's still unknown what the exact implications of that transition will be on the city's future waste streams. Furthermore, the projections did not consider the impact of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. So we know that there are many more residents that have been working, that continue to work from home and are disposing of more waste at home instead of in the workplace. And we have seen that. We've seen over the past year, on average, about a 10% increase in comparison to before the pandemic. And it's unclear at this time if these trends are experienced today, if they're going to be temporary or if they will be sustained into beyond once the pandemic ends. So for these reasons, these waste projections will be regularly updated as the waste plan is refreshed on a 5-year basis, and this is considered an industry best practice. This will also allow us to understand how the actual amount of waste managed is trending in comparison to the model projections, which will be useful insight when it comes to updating these waste projections into the future. Next slide, please. So when breaking the projections down by waste stream, you'll see that the amount of green bin tonnage, which includes household organics and and commingled leaf and yard waste, is projected to increase by 39%. Leaf and yard waste that is collected separately from material in the green bin is projected to increase by 40%. And again, based on the status quo, not considering the transition to IPR, the amount of blue bin material is projected to increase by 44%, and black bin materials are projected to increase by 37%. So hazardous and special products is projected to increase by about 47% by 2052. And finally, the amount of garbage and bulky waste that the city will be required to manage is expected to increase by about 35% by 2052. Next slide, please. So with an understanding of the amount of waste the city is expected to manage over the next 30 years, a needs analysis was undertaken to identify the future short term. So short term is looking at the next 0 to 5 years, midterms, the 6 to 15-year mark, and long term, so the 16 to 30-year mark, waste management needs for the city. The identification of the city's future waste management needs will serve as that foundation for the next stage of phase 2, which we'll touch on later in today's presentation, which involved the identification of the high-level long list of options available to meet each of the needs. So this part of the process explored the potential for enhancement to existing programs and policies. It helped to identify new opportunities. And for existing contracts that are expiring, it took a look at different opportunities. How might we want to be doing something different in the future? So this work was done ensuring alignment with the waste plan's proposed vision, the guiding principles and goals. In addition, it was guided by the 5 R's waste hierarchy, which formed part of the framework for the development of the waste plan, which was approved by Council in 2019 as part of the initial roadmap report. So a robust process was used to identify the city's future waste management needs. Our technical consulting team considered the waste projections that we just walked through, our most recent waste audit data, and all of the extensive research that was undertaken in phase 1 when identifying the future needs. The needs were then compared to the status quo system, and that helped us in identifying where there are key gaps between where we are today, where we want to be and need to be in the future, what some of the core challenges and constraints would be, and some of the different opportunities available to us to embrace. So identification of the future needs also considered Council's climate change goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 100% below 2012 levels by 2040 as a corporation. And it also considered some of the results of, or not some, it considered the results and initiatives identified through the city's energy evolution strategy. So as members of council may recall, there were 3 core projects that were identified through the energy evolution strategy on the waste management front, or specific to the waste sector. That includes transitioning to an electrified fleet, developing a strategy to recover resources from the organic waste, and developing a strategy to generate renewable natural gas from organic waste. So all of those you will see incorporated within the needs assessment, and they're also reflected in the long list of options. Next slide, please. So overall, the needs analysis identified 21 anticipated future needs that touch on various components of the integrated waste management system. So as you'll see here, we've broken on the slide, we've broken them down into 7 categories. So this includes needs that have touched on opportunities for waste reduction, reuse, diversion, touching on collection, drop-off opportunities, recovery of waste and energy, residuals management, and opportunities to lead by example in terms of how we manage our own waste as a corporation within our facilities and our operations, and various supporting system requirements. So that'll touch on opportunities such as enhanced promotion and education and innovation opportunities. So each need, the high-level gaps, the constraints and opportunities, as well as all the associated timing. So whether this is something that's recommended to address in the short term, the medium term, or the long term, is all summarized in the Phase 2 report, which again will be followed or will be shared with members of council following today's briefing session. And thorough details on each of the need are provided in the appending technical memorandums that will accompany the Phase 2 staff report. Some of the needs identified will not likely come as a surprise to council. However, some of the needs identified, or they do identify new areas where there is opportunity for us to improve upon as we move forward. And as staff, we'd acknowledged in the original roadmap report to council back in 2019 and the Phase 1 report last year that we did anticipate that we would not be following best practices in all areas. And the needs assessment definitely did highlight a number of areas that we have an opportunity to work on in the future to get us in a position to be in best or better practices. And all of those will also help in focusing our priorities as we move forward in developing the draft plan. So some of the future needs are also being addressed by staff through some of our ongoing waste plan component projects. So the Phase 2 report, I'm not going to go into detail because I could hold you up all afternoon, but we do provide a more detailed overview of those component projects in this Phase 2 staff report. But just an example of some of them, the ongoing curbside diversion options project, which is looking at a number of different regulatory tools that will help us increase diversion and encourage participation in diversion programs, and other city plans, such as the ongoing development of the Solid Waste Services Long Range Financial Plan. So there's some of that concurrent work that is happening right now that's working towards addressing some of the needs that you'll see in the needs assessment. And of course, and I'll hand it over to Shelley.
Thank you, Nicole. Next slide, please. So in addition to the 21 needs identified through the needs assessment that Nicole just touched on, the needs assessment also identified a number of key considerations and risks that have the potential to impact the long-term waste management in the city that need to be considered during the development of the solid waste master plan. Some of those may not come to fruition before we finalize the waste plan for council's consideration, which means that they'll likely need to be addressed in future plan updates. This further emphasizes the importance that the plan remain flexible, adaptable, and refreshed every 5 years to meet our needs and to be resilient as these risks and considerations evolve and present implications for future waste management system. There are regulatory changes happening to the provincial waste diversion program, such as the transition to individual producer responsibility. Nicole touched upon that earlier. The final regulations for the provincial Blue Box program were released on June 3rd, and the final regulations for the Hazardous and Special Products program, formerly the Municipal Hazardous and Special Waste program, were released on June the 8th. Staff are actively working to review both regulations to understand the impacts on our city, our programs, and for our waste plan. For the Blue Box program specifically, we're looking to see what this exactly means for our collection contracts. Staff will be preparing an update to council to advise of the changes and what the expected implications are for Ottawa. Another regulatory item that is a key consideration as we develop the waste plan is the Ontario Food and Organic Waste Framework. Late last year, the province released proposed amendments to the original policy framework that clarified and expanded the categories of food and organic waste that municipalities should make an effort to reduce and recover, including compostable coffee pods, soil paper food packaging, and certified compostable bags. The amendments also encourage municipalities to support pilot projects and research on the processing of compostable products and packaging, and consider adopting technology to collect and process compostable products and packaging in their systems as they're planning for new organics processing technology. While staff support the original policy statement, accepting compostable coffee pods and compostable packaging continues to be problematic for most processing facilities, including Ottawa's. But we recognize that as technology evolves, there will be new opportunities to process these types of materials. Staff submitted these concerns to the ministry in November, and we await further information. So climate change is another area that has implications on the city and its waste management system. It will impact the probability of severe weather events like tornadoes and floods, which can impact the collection, transportation, processing, and disposal of materials impacted by these events, as well as the amount of waste generated. Summers are predicted to get hotter, which is a risk to our collection workers. The growing season could increase, which could impact waste generation patterns, which has implications for our leaf and yard programs in particular. The Phase 2 report provides details on a number of these key considerations and will be available after today's briefing, as Nicole had already mentioned. Today, though, I'd like to take a moment and speak to the landfill life expectancy key consideration in further detail. This will provide some important context for the discussions and the work to come as we continue to develop the waste plan. Next slide, please. Recognizing that one of City Council's key priorities is preserving capacity at the trail waste facility, with the aim of maximizing its useful life, the first key consideration identified is landfill life expectancy. Extending or optimizing the capacity at the landfill is reflected in the proposed goals of the Solid Waste Master Plan, and it's also identified as a future need through the needs analysis process that Nicole just walked you through. As some of you may recall, in the early 2000s, the Trail Waste Facility landfill was estimated to reach capacity and close in 2009. In response to this, the city undertook an environmental assessment to increase the capacity of the landfill, and in 2005, an environmental assessment for the Trail Road landfill expansion was approved by the ministry. This approval provided an additional 10 to 40 years of capacity, with the time range varying from a status quo diversion rate and no use of private landfills to significant improvements to diversion and the use of private landfills. Based on this additional capacity, the landfill was estimated to reach capacity sometime between 2019 and 2049. To date, when estimating and reporting on the anticipated closure date of the trail waste facility, the city has relied on the annual monitoring report that is submitted to the ministry. This uses a compliance methodology consisting of historical lagging indicators, such as previous year's airspace and capacity consumption, to estimate the remaining landfill capacity. While this approach is recognized as being acceptable and common practice for compliance purposes, staff have come to realize that this is not a best practice for forward-looking planning purposes, which is the path that the city has embarked on with the development of this waste plan. During Phase 2, staff undertook a detailed review of the 2019 annual monitoring report calculation, the most current monitoring report for the landfill, with a specific focus on the disposal trends. Based on the remaining available capacity as detailed in this report, it's estimated there's approximately 30% of the capacity remaining at the landfill. This, in conjunction with staff's review of the disposal trends, we've determined that if the city remains on the status quo path with regards to waste reduction and diversion, the trail waste facility is expected to reach capacity between 2036 and 2038. While staff are confident that this council is well positioned in terms of time and ability to preserve the landfill's remaining capacity and prolong its useful life, the time to act is now. To address this, staff are proposing the following. Next slide, please. Staff are recommending that a more aggressive actions under a residual management strategy be undertaken in the short term to do everything possible to preserve the life of this vital city asset in concert with the Solid Waste Master Plan. It's envisioned that this roadmap report will address the following objectives: review the landfill life expectancy methodology and adopt a best practice methodology for planning purposes that estimates a more appropriate range of remaining capacity. The transition to a methodology that includes forward-looking considerations that is presented as a range of years is critical in reflecting the dynamic nature of landfill operations and the many variables that can impact available capacity into the future. We also would like to analyze options aimed at preserving capacity and extending the life at the landfill, which have been identified through the master planning process. Some of these for your consideration are banning certain materials from being disposed of at Trail Road. For example, materials such as construction and demolition waste, where the material generally doesn't compact very well, and there are other private landfill options available for residents and businesses. We could look at increasing tipping fees for certain types of materials. We could leverage technology and explore options to showcase these technologies at the Trail Road facility. We do have an abundance of buffer land that could set up these trial and pilot locations. We could explore opportunities to dispose of waste at other local private sector landfills, whether it be through a direct disposal or through the use of a transfer station. And we would also look at exploring options to optimize the Trail Road landfill. Staff continue to leverage efficiencies within the daily operations at the landfill. Over the last year, staff have modified the approach to landfilling waste, moving to a more efficient push pad operation. This method of landfilling aligns specialized equipment to maximize compaction of the waste, essentially replacing more material within the same footprint. By advancing this work concurrent to the development of the solid waste master plan, staff are confident that Council will be equipped with the necessary information to take swift and meaningful action in effectively preserving the remaining available capacity at Trail Road, while simultaneously bringing the city back in line with best practices for landfill capacity estimations for planning purposes. So now pass it back to Nicole.
Great, thank you, Shelley. So next slide, please. So in addition, Shelley touched on a number of different options that have been identified through the master planning process that we are specifically looking at advancing through the development of the residuals waste management strategy. But of course, there are many more options that have been identified that will touch on opportunities to address the various needs beyond the life of the landfill that we're considering through the master plan's development. So of course, with the completion of the long-term needs assessment and the future needs identified, the next step in the phase 2, including developing that long list of high-level options to meet the city's future waste management needs over the next 30 years. Next slide, please. So the high-level options proposed in the long list were identified by a number of different sources and were developed through an evidence-based research approach. So the options development considered the technical expertise of the project's technical consulting team based on extensive research that was conducted in phase 1 and further supplemented by additional research in phase 2, along with their professional judgment and industry expertise. We also considered feedback from our councillor sponsors group and members of council through the various meetings that we've had over the last year and a half, based of course upon members of council's knowledge and feedback from their constituents. The general public and project stakeholders provided feedback through consultations during engagement series 1. Also from our City Champions Working Group and city staff based on their knowledge of the city and its needs and synergies with other city strategies. So specifically through Engagement Series 1, we solicited input and ideas from key stakeholders and residents in terms of what options and ideas that they wanted to see considered by the city in the waste plan. So we really offered that opportunity. The sky's the limit in terms of different options that they wanted to put forward for us to research and further consider. So we are fairly confident that the list of options is fulsome and includes feasible high-level options for the city to consider in the short, medium, and long term that align with the city's future needs and the proposed vision, guiding principles, and goals. It's important to highlight that over the next 30 years, the options that the city considers will evolve. Options will be added, some may be removed, and some might be put on hold as well in order to keep the plan adaptable and to ensure that it's meeting the city's waste management needs and also ensuring that it's responding to the emerging industry trends and changes within the waste management industry. So with the evolution of technologies, the results of pilots, the introduction of new programs, and the changes and evolution in industry best practices, staff will work to continually identify new options to consider as the plan is refreshed every 5 years. Next slide, please. So overall, as the chair had alluded to in his introduction, the analysis identified just over 70 different options, which we've grouped into 10 different categories. Of course, the materials contained within the phase 2 report will go into depth, including all the details on all the different options. But we have, over the next 3 slides, just provided a couple of different examples. So all of the options have been grouped into 10 different categories. And each option that is summarized in the phase 2 report does include comprehensive details on each of the options. So it includes an overview of the option, its alignment with the future needs, the various regulatory considerations that we need to contemplate when considering the options, as well as environmental, social, financial, operational considerations, which are all going to be very important information that will be used in the options evaluation process. And again, that detail is also provided in the impending technical memorandums that will accompany the phase 2 staff report. So the first 3 categories, which you see on this slide, include options that touch on promotion and education, which include opportunities to further our outreach and education initiatives and introducing new marketing and communications tools. The regulations, policies, and bylaw looks at a host of different policies and regulations that we can consider to help increase diversion, but it also looks beyond that at, it also looks more beyond that to look at mechanisms and different tools that we can use to help support waste reduction as well. So the last category that you see on the slide, waste avoidance, reduction, and reuse, looks at a whole host of different options that focus on those earlier R's within the 5 R's hierarchy. So you see a couple examples here: single-use item reduction strategy, looking to put together a circular economy strategy that would look at both opportunities for us as a city, as an organization, but how we can work and influence the movement towards developing a circular economy more broadly within the Ottawa community. So moving on to the next slide, please. So the next slide, we touch on 3 other core areas of focus. So under recycling, we touch on a number of different options to enhance existing programs that we have in place. For example, enhancements to our textile waste diversion program, and also look at opportunities to expand recycling and introducing new recycling and collection programs. So for example, you see here, separate bulky item collection and recycling. The next, under collection and drop-off, this again gives examples looking at opportunities to improve upon our existing system, but also opportunities to introduce new collection programs. So you'll see different options that touch on the notion of having more temporary or permanent drop-off depots located within communities for materials that cannot be diverted through our current diversion programs. Also included in this category, we'll be looking at implementing a citywide waste diversion program in parks and looking at expanding waste diversion in other public spaces. And the last speaks to organics management options. So the whole host of options that you'll see that relate to this category touch on opportunities to process organics differently beyond the city's current processing contract with Convertis. And it also looks at future opportunities for managing leaf and yard waste. Next slide, please. And then the last 4 categories that you'll see here, and again, more details in the phase 2 report, touch on waste and energy recovery. So a couple of different opportunities here, look at opportunities, once our existing contract for landfill gas management expires, what different opportunities we can contemplate for generating energy. Also looking at new sources of energy generation. So for example, using anaerobic digestion for organics to allow us to generate biogas. And of course, also included in this, look at opportunities for mass burn incineration as well, and mixed waste processing. Moving on to residual management. So that kind of touches on some of the elements, or you'll see various options in there that look at opportunities to further enhance and optimize the existing trail road facility. And it also considers a whole host of different options that we can contemplate in the future once the life of the trail, or once trail road has reached capacity. We also have a category on innovation, which includes an option here looking at an innovation and technology strategy. And then the last touches on another category. Shelley touched on this as well. It's looking at opportunities for either community use or potential opportunities for innovation and pilot demonstration using the buffer lands that we have that surround the trail road landfill. This category also includes an option to transition the solid waste fleet to a zero emission fleet. Next slide, please. So with Council's approval of the Waste Plan's vision statement, the guiding principles and goals, staff will begin the options evaluation process and work towards developing the draft waste plan as well as the 5-year implementation plan. As Council will recall from the approved master plan framework, now that the city's anticipated future needs for the next 30 years have been identified, along with a long list of options available to meet these needs, the technical consulting team will evaluate each of the options to narrow them down to a short list of options for the city that will be taken to the community and stakeholders for input this fall. The evaluation process and technical tool was developed by the project's technical consulting team and considered best practices and approaches that have been used by other municipal or through other municipal waste planning processes, but of course considered the unique nature of Ottawa and considered key council approved lenses that form the basis of that triple bottom line tool. It was also developed with input and guidance from our councillor sponsors group and considered important input received by our project stakeholder sounding board, our city champions group, and then some other key city staff with technical expertise. The technical triple bottom line tool will assess and balance various social, environmental, and financial considerations and ensure that the short-term list of options suitable for Ottawa's future waste management needs balance these multiple considerations. So once the evaluation process is complete, staff will brief members of council on the proposed shortlist of options that will be brought to residents and stakeholders as part of engagement series 2 this fall. So we anticipate being in a position to do that early into the fall, so likely early into September. So options that do not make it onto the shortlist, they won't completely disappear. They will, of course, remain on staff's radar and will be re-evaluated as appropriate during the next 5-year refresh. While some of the options might not necessarily be suitable in the short term, such as technologies that are still emerging and are not necessarily proven yet for managing municipal waste, staff, of course, are committed to remaining engaged on the different options to ensure that council, the city is leveraging all suitable options that can work towards helping meet the goals of the waste plan. So now I'm just going to walk you briefly through the evaluation process. Next slide, please. So to ensure an effective and efficient, but also a transparent evaluation process, the evaluation process will be completed in 2 steps. So firstly, all options will be screened using a series of questions. And secondly, a triple bottom line evaluation will be done on the options that pass through that initial screening step. The technical consulting team will conduct the evaluation and apply the initial screening to all options to determine which ones warrant moving forward for a more thorough and detailed triple bottom line evaluation. So any of the options where the answer to all the screening questions are yes will not be evaluated further. They're going to be automatically carried forward for consideration as part of the shortlist. So the types of options that are expected to kind of make its way through this initial screening process would be options that have clear environmental and social benefits, and in general have lower costs and also lower resource requirements compared to the options that require more significant capital investment and operational staff requirements. So an example of some of the options that you'll likely see screened through the short list include different promotion and education options, corporate strategies, bylaws, policies, and regulatory tools. So those options that will proceed to the triple bottom line evaluation include those options that tend to be, again, more costly, require more resources, and also options where the potential benefits, the costs, or the impact to diversion might not necessarily be well understood, and therefore will require a more rigorous evaluation process to determine which ones offer the greatest potential value to the city. So an example of some of the options that will very likely move on to that triple bottom line assessment will include the options that touch on different collection approaches or different organics management technologies and waste to energy options, as well as some of those options for residual waste management. Next slide, please. So the triple bottom line evaluation tool was developed to more extensively, again, evaluate the screened options based on their environmental sustainability, health, social implications, as well as financial viability. So this structured approach will allow us to compare the different options based on a consistent set of criteria that reflect stakeholder priorities. And it will help determine which options offer the greatest potential value to the city. So the framework includes 3 different criteria per category. Again, they'll be very detailed in the phase 2 report, but for high-level purposes for today's technical briefing, those 3 different categories include the environmental sustainability category, and that will assess resource efficiency, including the potential to avoid or reduce waste or increase waste diversion, climate impacts, so specifically the potential to reduce GHG emissions and reduce energy consumption, and local impacts to the environment, including on land and to water quality. The health and social implications category will assess potential impacts to safety, potential impacts to human health, equity and inclusion, for example, stakeholder acceptance and level of effort, and economic development opportunities. And the financial viability category will assess the direct costs, both capital and operating, the potential revenue and savings, along with risk and reliability. Next slide, please. So once all the options have been screened and evaluated, the short list of the highest ranking options that align with the city's needs and the master plan's vision, guiding principles and goals will be developed. And so they'll be grouped into one of 3 categories, and we're going to use them to build 2 different future waste management systems, so one moderate and one aggressive. And these systems will then be compared against each other and to the status quo, and particularly with respect to waste diversion potential, GHG emission reduction potential, energy generating potential, estimated cost, and risk. And the reason why we're taking this approach is to help facilitate conversations with the community and stakeholders to help gauge how far and how fast we collectively want to move as a community towards achieving the plan's goals, as well as providing opportunities to provide input on the different options being considered in the draft plan. Because we know a lot of the different options, and you'll see this identified in the different options templates, is a lot of them do require resident behavior change. So this really does have to be a community or a strategy and plan built by the community, and one that residents are willing to undertake and do their part to help in collectively achieving the goals of the strategy. So staff will consult on the 2 potential systems during engagement series 2 starting this fall. And the feedback received will help inform the recommendations for the draft master plan and accompanying 5-year implementation plan. So I'll now pass it back to Shelley, who's going to provide details on next steps and wrap things up.
Thank you, Nicole. Next slide, please. So a lot of technical work has taken place over the past year since we were here in front of committee and council. The theme that's been shared through today's presentation, and as you'll see numerous times in the report, is the message that the waste plan is being developed in such a way that allows it to be flexible and adaptable. The waste industry is dynamic. New technologies will emerge, new regulations and legislations will come forward. The approach to refresh the plan every 5 years positions the city well, so that we'll be able to respond and incorporate any changes or advancements that may come forward in the future. We recognize that the report requires a lot of reading and contains a lot of detailed information, considering all the different supporting documents. So as Nicole mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, just like to remind you now that to support your review, staff are available to discuss any or all of these documents in between now and committee, and we'll also be prepared to answer questions at committee. Next slide, please. So next steps. So this summer, the technical consultant team will evaluate the long list of options using the screening process and triple bottom line evaluation framework. And then, as Nicole mentioned, generate two future waste management systems for consultation. Staff will brief members of council on the two systems and outline how they differ and how they meet the city's short, medium, and long-term needs. Staff will also note which options were put on hold due to unknowns, lack of industry experience, or technology. Staff will present the two systems to the Councillor Sponsors Group, the City Champions Group, Stakeholder Sounding Board, the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee, and the Accessibility Advisory Committee. In preparation for Engagement Series 2, staff will engage with the Gender and Race Equity, Indigenous Relations, Diversity and Inclusion branch to ensure that our consultation follows a culturally and contextually appropriate equity and inclusion engagement process with equity-deserving groups. This fall, staff will launch Engagement Series 2, which is expected to last approximately 2 months, and will seek further feedback from residents and community stakeholders on the future waste management systems being considered for the waste plan, including feedback that will be used to inform the development of performance targets. Staff will brief the Councillor Sponsors Group on the outcomes of the Engagement Series 2 and seek further guidance to select the preferred options that will make up the city's future waste management system, which will form the basis of the draft waste plan and the 5-year implementation plan. In early 2022, Council will receive the Phase 3 Waste Plan report, which will include the draft Solid Waste Master Plan and 5-year implementation plan. It will also include a fully costed business case for the recommended future waste management system, a 30-year financing plan with high-level estimates for long-term financial planning purposes, a 10-year capital infrastructure and operating requirements plan, performance measures, and short and medium-term targets, and a monitoring and reporting requirements. Staff will then launch Engagement Series 3 to gather feedback from residents and stakeholders on the proposed draft waste plan and implementation plan. Council will consider the final solid waste master plan and implementation plan in early 2023. Next slide, please. And that concludes today's presentation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Thank you, Nicole. Appreciate the presentation. So now is the time where we're going to go into questions from members of council and council assistants. I know we have about 15 offices represented here, which is fantastic. Following that, we'll go into questions. I haven't seen any in the participants list, but members from the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee who were also invited. And then we'll move into, we'll have a bit of a break before Keena Leclerc moderates questions from the media. Obviously, I think an important aspect of this, something Shelley spoke about, was the landfill life. If councillors might recall, back in the late 2000s, around 2008 or so, council received an update on landfill life at that time. And the lifespan was anywhere from 2019 to 2049, based on what the next steps would be, how the city manages waste. Of course, that was the time that we implemented the green bin and made other adjustments. And I think we obviously didn't reach the diversion rate we were hoping to, which would have extended the life even further. But certainly we have a better idea. A lot of effort has been put in by staff the last year or so to get a really good sense of where that landfill stands today. And the decisions from phase 2 from this entire master plan can really help lead us to a position where we're actually extending that life further than what you heard today. So we'll go right to, and again, if you're an assistant and you want to put your hand up, by all means, everyone has the same status here. So we'll go first to Councillor El Shantiri.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for your presentation. Shelley, I'm not sure if you'll be able to put slide 19, but you need to talk obviously about the life of Trail Road. And yes, as Councillor Moffatt mentioned in the past, we thought, we have more time than what we are seeing now. So before the fall, I would like to see ourselves as a couple of options. One of the options we had in the past, where we start taking more residential waste to the trail road, and we save some money, which is fine. It's a good decision. But when you talk about, waste facility expected to reach capacity between 36 and 38. So someone like me been dealing with the local expansion of a landfill, started in 2005, 2006. 16 years later, they have not even have a shovel in the ground yet. So which is mean your time in here, it doesn't give you enough time to expand if you're looking for expansion, or to find a new landfill. So I like to have another option to council in when you come back in the fall to say either we can use other landfill available to us now to dispose our residential waste, or if we continue going to trail road the way we are, we need to, by next term of council, start looking for a new landfill. I think Councillor Moffatt, myself, we know it's going to take you more than 20 years, if any, to be able to secure another site for landfill. And unless we have other option, we haven't heard yet whether incineration or other, but as long as we are talking about landfill, recovery, reduce, I don't see we have option here other than is a warning in 17 years we're going to be full, and what we do then.
So Chair Moffatt,
for the phone.
Chair Moffatt, would you like me to provide a little bit of insight on a response? And
yeah, absolutely.
Excellent, thank you. So, Councillor Shantiri, thank you for your points. Great points. And I think the next slide, we spoke to wanting to advance the residual management strategy. And so basically staff will go away using some of the options that are identified in the phase 2 report that you'll receive once this briefing is over. We'll be reviewing what might be possible and then bringing that back to the councillor sponsors group and bringing it back to committee in the fall. So I think give us a bit of time in order to explore what might be possible in the short term, because you're absolutely right. In order to decide a new landfill, it's 12 to 15 years. So give us the opportunity to take a look to see what quick wins, what low hanging fruit might be out there in order to support extending the life that we can action now. So I think that's what we're recommending, and certainly look forward to council support on that recommendation. So that'll be coming forward as part of the phase 2 report later in June, seeking council's recommendation.
But again, what I'm asking for, Ms. McDonald, I'm asking for option. You give us an option. If we're going the way it's going today, within 20 years, you're going to exhaust that trail road. If we go somewhere with our own and keep the facility like trail road available for us, that's another option. We need some of those options to be on the table. I mean, when you say 12 to 15 years, I'm sorry to correct you, but if you can find a landfill within 20 years, you've done a great job, because we've seen the process, how long it takes for others to secure a landfill. So I need option to say we can take our garbage somewhere else, whether to a new landfill or the existing landfill, that we can save hours, or we can fill hours and look for a new site. We just need some of those options.
Absolutely, Councillor, and that's what the residual waste strategy will do. We will bring back later in the summer to the councillor sponsors group, and in the fall what our strategy is going to be. So what are those options, and what does that mean? What are some of what can we expect? What are some of the diversion? What are some of those outcomes that we can expect to achieve for then council's consideration in order to determine whether that is enough, or if there are other things that you would like us to consider.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, staff. Great job, really is. lot to digest.
Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. Yeah, so we'll be a part of that. Obviously, you sit on the council sponsors group alongside myself and Councillor Dudas and Councillor Bernard. So we'll be a part of that discussion too before that report comes to committee and council in the fall of this year. Moving to Councillor Kavanagh.
Well, thank you very much, Scott, and staff. We have big jobs to do. We're the cleanup crew. That's what municipalities are, but we don't set the policies. And one of my concerns is single-use plastics. The federal government made announcements to get rid of single-use plastics, but we haven't seen much yet. How much impact will that have on what we're doing? Will it be significant? Will it be on time?
Great question, Councillor Kavanagh. Thank you for that. So in terms of, you're absolutely right, there was an announcement made by the federal government in terms of their progress on implementing a nationwide single-use plastic ban, and that was just a month ago. So essentially what that does is it gives the federal government the ability to move forward and implement their ban. So the most recent indications that we have from the federal government is that they do intend on releasing a draft regulation for that proposed ban. And again, recalling that it is 6 items that they are looking at as part of that ban. We anticipate receiving that or having that release sometime this fall. So it's something that we continue to actively monitor the progress on that. So in terms of how that is expected to impact, it will have ultimately impacts on the waste stream that we as a municipality are required to manage. That ban will require essentially those items to no longer be manufactured, no longer be sold within Canada. So you could see those items no longer being a part of the waste stream. What alternatives might be put in place are unknown, but that will be something that we have to continue monitoring as that new legislation is put into place. And then in terms of options, you will see a particular option in the long list of options that speaks to the development of a single-use item reduction strategy. So looking at opportunities to move above and beyond what the federal government is doing. So look at opportunities using the legislative tools that we as a municipality have to help further influence opportunities to reduce single-use items within the community. So that is one of the options on the table.
Thank you. And what about at the provincial level? Is anything coming down that would help us out?
So in terms of single-use plastics, Councillor?
Yeah, or anything to do with waste management.
Yeah, 100. So I think first and foremost, as Shelley had touched on in the presentation, just a couple of weeks ago, the province did finally reduce final regulations on the transition of the provincial Blue Box program to individual producer responsibility. So as part of that, which is of interest to this particular strategy, is the items that will be accepted in the new provincial program once it's rolled out across the program by 2026 will expand the number of items that residents are able to include within the Blue Box, or both the blue and black box. The province made it a priority to include a number of different difficult to manage items, so which include a number of different single-use items. So chip bags, as an example, those will be items that residents will have an opportunity to include in their recycling program as opposed to the waste program. So Shelley had alluded to my colleague Andrea Gay-Farley. Her and her team are currently working through those final regulations and working through understanding what the implications will be to the future waste management system, and also what the implications will be on the master planning process. And they will be preparing a briefing for members of committee and council on that as well.
Thank you very much. What more can we do on the education side? I still feel that there's a big gap in terms of people understanding how to use a blue box and a black box and a green bin. That's one of my concerns. Is that how are we going to deal with that in terms of further education?
So there are a number of different options that you will see. I'm just looking at my list here. I think there's 5 or 6 different options on the long list that speak to opportunities to expand, in particular, our outreach initiatives. So really looking back to that insight that we have from the Hill and Knowlton market research that was done, and also through some of our outreach efforts done through the implementation of the most recent changes to the Green Bin program. So taking some insight in terms of the success, and one of the areas that resonated a lot with residents and did have an impact was our outreach efforts. So there are options on opportunities to expand those both within our curbside sector, but also heavily within our multi-residential sector, which we know has a whole host of unique challenges and a significant opportunity for us to work on increasing diversion. And then there's a number of different new marketing and communications tools that we can consider implementing, further expanding our existing communications and outreach program. And then there's another option specific to looking at opportunities to develop a behavioral change management strategy. So recognizing that a lot of participating in diversion programs does require that behavioral change. It requires a change in habits on residents. So it's looking at opportunities to kind of be more progressive in terms of using behavioral science and looking at opportunities to implement different approaches.
Great, thank you. Just one last question. I know my colleagues have questions. The recent pilot project of putting recycling bins or containers in parks, I'm finding very, very popular, and everyone's clamoring to have more. I don't know how effective they are. I guess it's too early. It is a pilot project, but I wonder if that can be part of our education strategy, since you're getting a cross section of people going to parks and you know, seeing that they must recycle at the parks. I know sometimes it's done at Tim Hortons and stuff, but I don't know how well it's done. How have we learned anything so far in that pilot project?
Maybe I'll touch on it a bit, and Shelley, if you want to add anything on to that. So you're right, Councillor, it is early days. However, this is a pilot program that we are building upon earlier iterations of the pilot that took place over the last couple of years. So what we are seeing fairly successful in terms of opportunities to enhance diversion, especially organics and dog waste. Early indications too, you know, it's not new within the industry. The greatest challenge is contamination. So you do see higher levels of contamination in the recycling streams, both in parks and public spaces. And that ultimately creates challenges when it comes to marketing some of those recyclable materials. So our revenue generation opportunity is usually not as strong as it would be with our curbside households. But early indications are fairly successful. This year, we're looking again at expanding and specifically looking at some of those larger locations, such as a destination park, requires a completely different operational model to give us some good data and insight. And of course, the insight from the parks pilot will provide insight to recommendations moving forward through the master plan. So one of the options to include it in the master plan, of course, includes expanding or actually implementing, pardon me, a citywide parks diversion program.
That's great, and hopefully that works in well with the banning of single-use plastics and everything else, because most of it is takeaway garbage. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Thanks, Councillor.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll just briefly touch on the provincial piece. We've had some discussions about this in our sponsors group as well, and stemming from a conversation we had there, I actually reached out, managed to get a meeting with Jeff Urick, who is the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks for Ontario. And I know that, you know, from his perspective, their focus was getting the framework in place, getting the increased producer responsibility in place for both the blue box and then what's coming on next. We anticipate is the hazardous and special products policy. And then from that point, once they get the framework in place, once they get that sort of established with the producer responsibility, adding items to those programs to increase the diversion rate. I know that the one positive I'd say, like, we often, when it comes to party politics, we often see governments kind of undo the work of others. But one consistent piece I can point to is that the Waste Free Ontario Act, it was put in place by the previous government. The current government has taken it on and has continued to move it forward. It is nice to see that regardless of government, they're all on the same page when it comes to that act and ensuring that we increase diversion in Ontario, and really helping the municipalities, because we're the ones that are, as you mentioned, we're the ones that clean it up. We're the ones that are here dealing with it day in, day out. So the more that the province can do to help us manage that and make it easier for residents, which is all we're trying to do as well, then that's a positive. So some good things there.
Good to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move to Councillor Egline.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick comment to my colleague, Councillor Kavanagh. This week, we worked with the solid waste people who have sort of a traveling roadshow about waste diversion. Very well received by residents in my community and very well done by staff. It's a combination of presentation, videos, Q&A session, some interactive pieces. So I highly recommend it as an educational tool to very knowledgeable staff able to answer all the questions and good engagement with the community. So just wanted to give a shout out to staff in that regard. Just one quick question, and I'll probably get the title somewhat wrong, but this sort of triple bottom line approach to evaluate and assess, are the three factors equally weighted in that assessment, or is it more leaning towards the financial sustainability, or how does that work? How do we implement that test, and what weights given to the three components?
Great question, Councillor. So you're 100% right. So the feedback we heard loud and clear from our stakeholder sounding board, which represents all different facets of the community and different perspectives, as well as feedback from the councillor sponsors group in terms of balancing the different council priorities that have been established, that we would provide equal weighting to each of the different categories. So again, that we are that true sense of nature of we're trying to equally balance those different considerations when we're looking at the options.
No, I'm glad to hear that, because often at the city, we end up making a decision 100% on cost, and that doesn't always go the way we want it to. So I appreciate the fact that all three are going to be considered on an equal playing field. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And yeah, thanks for your comments on that program. I know that staff reached out to a number of councils. I think Councillor Meehan's office might have facilitated one of those as well. Recently, using our staff and promoting diversion and what's going on in the city and how residents can partake and increase diversion. So I don't have any other hands up. If anyone would like to ask a question, by all means, please raise your hand, or anyone who's still in attendance here. I'll just give it a couple seconds to see if anyone wants to jump in. Of course, we will have this report will go live this afternoon. It will come to our Environment Committee meeting on June 29th. So members of council, of course, invited to that committee meeting to discuss there. So Caroline Meehan has raised her hand. So Councillor Meehan, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. I guess just one question. I'm wondering, where does the Orga World contract fit into this new plan? Will it be changed? I guess I'll just leave it at that.
So I can touch it a bit. I mean, that contract has, I believe, around 10 years left on it. And the Solid Waste Master Plan will consider, what's next in that. So we look at this the next 30 years, and obviously with the Orga World contract, which is now Convertus, only being 10 years left, this plan will look at organics, diversion, and processing. But I'll allow Shelley or Nicole to touch on any further to that.
Yeah, so Chair Moffatt's correct. So we have about 9 years left in that contract. It does expire in 2030. So one of the needs that has been identified in the master planning process is, of course, it's the need, but also the opportunity to do things differently at the end of that contract. And kind of as Councillor El-Shantiri and Shelley had touched on, of course, some of these big capital investments, not just unique to landfills, but also different technologies such as organics management can take us anywhere, from 5 to 10 years to implement. So that's an important consideration in the short term for us to start looking at the different opportunities. So you will see a whole host of different opportunities and different options for what we can do or how we might want to do things differently. Under council's, as part of the energy evolution strategy, in an attempt to work towards meeting council's climate change reduction targets, one of the options that is identified is the use of an anaerobic digestion technology, and that would allow us to generate biogas, which can be converted into renewable natural gas. So that's just one example, one of the different opportunities that we're looking at through the master plan.
And where are we, like what percentage are we currently diverting using the ORGA contract?
So in terms of diversion, so overall diversion, we had an uptake with the most recent, which can be linked back to the most recent changes to the organics processing contract. So we're sitting at about 52% for curbside, 16% overall organics diversion in the overall diversion in the multi-residential sector. So last year we did divert, I don't have the exact figures in front of me, but it was just over 100,000 tons of organic waste that was successfully diverted.
Sorry, Shelley, so 100,000 tons?
Just over 100,000 tons, Shelley.
And what was our goal?
So Council, what Nicole is alluding to is we diverted over 100,000 tons of organics from the landfill. So in combination of what was sent to Convertus and then what we've collected separately through our Leaf and Yard program. So we can though give you the exact split of what went to Convertus if that's what you're looking for. But in total last year, like Nicole mentioned, it was over 100,000 tons that was diverted from landfill.
Okay, but some of the lessons we've learned from this contract, we're going to be utilizing those in this. What would you say is the biggest lesson for us? What are we going to do differently?
I would say, Councillor, a couple of different lessons learned. I think one of them being the details in the put or pay. So I think that might be, if I'm understanding correctly, your earlier question. So we did surpass the put or pay threshold. So as you'll recall, Council did, through the renegotiation back in 2018, did reduce that to 75,000 tons. So we did surpass that. So we're no longer paying for processing capacity that we're not using. That being one of the key considerations. I think we will also be looking at different opportunities. Where we were 15 years ago when we started exploring processing capacity, it was a very different landscape than today. The City of Ottawa was an early adopter of the Green Bin program, so no local capacity available. It's a different story today. Also having experience or over a decade of experience operating this program, we do have an opportunity to look at is this something that we as a city want to, or would council be interested, in further contracting out services? Do we want to look at opportunities for P3 partnerships or also owning and operating these facilities on our own? So we'll consider those whole host of the suite of procurement options as well when we're exploring the future technology options.
Okay, and one of the other options I saw is, I guess, paper bag, clear plastic bags. I'm going to make it clear that these are just options on the table right now in case somebody sees this and says, oh my God, I'm going to have to pay to put an extra bag out.
Absolutely, Councillor. So that's one of the core fundamental pieces of, we're still not done, right? We're about 2/3 of the way through the master planning process. At this juncture of the master planning process, this is the laundry list of options. So all the different options that we can consider as a municipality to meet the different needs, but also that align with those opportunities to meet the proposed vision, goals, and guiding principles, which council will consider. So yes, nothing is set in stone at this point. We will be out in the community in the fall. The options that make their way down to the shortlist, that's what we'll be taking out to the community. And we will be asking the community for input on the different options, different considerations that we need to contemplate with the different options. So nothing is set in stone at this point.
But if people don't start, if we don't educate them, if we don't get them to voluntarily do some of the things, some of these tough measures are going to really have to be considered, like paying for bags and tags and everything. Yeah,
that's correct.
Yeah, we're at that point, right? We've got to get serious about this stuff now.
We're definitely getting there. I mean, there's only so many.
Yeah.
There's only so much education you can do before you have to start taking maybe a couple more serious steps to get to where we really need to be. Because ultimately, we know, I mean, you heard Councillor Alchentieri, but we know nobody wants to have a conversation about a new landfill. So I've always tried to take a landfill last approach in my mind, and that's the last thing we want to consider. But in order to keep it at the bottom of the list, we might need to consider some of these other things in the list that might not be as palatable from a residential perspective. But it'll be interesting to see what happens with the consultation in the fall. I mean, a lot of these options will be put out to the public. We'll get their feedback, and we'll see. I think the sentiment from the community is different today than it was 10 years ago. I know there are people who were just completely set against the green bin program back in 2008, 2009, and it's a lot more accepted today than it was then. So we're in the right direction, but we don't want to come into a situation where we're reviewing this plan. So this plan gets approved in 2023. We don't want a situation in 2028 where all of a sudden that landfill life hasn't budged, and that's the time where it's going to get serious. So if we can make decisions now that's maybe a little painful for some people, but can help us get to where we need to be, I think that'll be a positive, long-term positive.
Call that a nudge, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Councillor Meehan. So again, not seeing any other further questions. I don't think I have any members of the Environmental Stewardship Advisory Committee. I have been kind of poking around the list here to see, and I'm not seeing anyone. There's certainly no more hands up at this moment. So given that, I'm happy to wrap up. So as I mentioned just before Councillor Meehan spoke, this will come to committee on June 29th, and we'll discuss this report in detail there. It'll be obviously another opportunity for everyone to ask questions and discuss with staff, and also for members of the public to present to committee and discuss the report and provide options, their thoughts on some of the options in the list before we get to a short list. And I do expect there to be some service providers that will also come and provide suggestions about what the city can do and how they can help us. So I think you'll expect to see that. Before I close up, I do sincerely want to thank the interpreters that we have here. Phenomenal work as always, just as they did back in April of 2020. Thank you so much for everything that you do to help us out here and communicate with members of the public. So with that said, I will hand it back to Keena, who I believe will provide guidance on where we go next in terms of the media portion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you everyone for your time. This concludes the technical briefing with regards to the councillor portion. We'll take a 15-minute break and come back for the media availability. Alors, ceci conclut notre séance virtuelle technique. Pour les conseillers, nous allons prendre une petite pause de 15 minutes pour venir pour le point de presse. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. the availability portion of today's technical briefing on the second phase of the Solid Waste Master Plan. Merci de vous joindre à nous pour le point de presse sur la séance d'information technique relative à la deuxième phase du plan directeur de la gestion des déchets solides. As always, a reminder to place your microphone on mute until I invite you to ask your question. Veuillez garder votre microphone désactivé jusqu'à ce que je vous invite à poser votre question. I will now invite each agency alphabetically. You may ask one question with one follow-up. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des médias qui pourront poser une question et une question de suivi. So we will now begin with Kate Porter at CBC Ottawa.
Thanks, Kina. Without having seen this list of 72 options, I wonder if, my question would be for Chair Moffatt and a staff member, if they could enlighten me too. Just what are some of the examples of options that would be more aggressive or show would need a big change in lifestyle, you know, like the green bin was a big thing. So what are some of the options that you expect would be more aggressive or would call for a lot more change?
Well, I think off the top, banning materials that go in the garbage would be one. That's going to be a significant shift for anyone who has to deal with that, because then we would have to, obviously enforce that. Shifting to clear plastic bags, developing a tag a bag system. These types of things are all pretty different from what we do today that will likely see some pushback. So I think those are three just off the top. And like I said, there's a lot of options here, but they don't all, not every option, not all 72 pertain to the consumer, to the resident. Some of them are just about how the city handles waste and how we process waste. But I think off the top, those are three that I can think of. I don't know if Shelley or Nicole have ideas on others maybe that I'm not mentioning.
And I would say too, just building off of what Chair Moffatt touched on, there are a number of different options. For example, looking at opportunities to expand and looking at new items that we don't currently offer through diversion programs today. So expanding what the different types of the waste stream that we do recycle. So those types of options too would while could lead to positive environmental outcomes, they will represent a change and a lot of education to residents as well for something that they might be used to throwing in the garbage stream. If we're now introducing an opportunity to recycle it, there's a number of different options that look at those opportunities as well.
Sorry, I have a separate clarification I need, but is there an example of banning materials, like which materials to expand to?
Well, like just straight up banning organics from the garbage.
Okay, and then my follow-up was that chart that showed, the projections of 37% more waste by 2052. Is that if we stay on this trajectory? And how much would you want, if I'm understanding it correctly, how much would you want to see that graph change, seeing as you'd set a zero waste vision?
Yep, so you are correct. So that is based on, at this juncture of the solid waste master planning process, those projections were developed based on the status quo system. So if nothing changes in terms of increasing diversion beyond today's program, then that's what the projections into the future will look like. So as part of the next phase, when we start evaluating those options and looking at the different, the most suitable options to meet the recommended vision, goals, and guiding principles, that's when we're going to then start looking at the potential that they can have in terms of increasing diversion. So shifting some of those divertible materials out of the waste stream. So that's going to come, and that will be some of the information that we consult on with the residents later this year. So that's the next stage that'll help us get an understanding of how much we can expect to see with the various options that we're considering, how much additional diversion.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. Moving on, we will be going to Eric O'Brien at City News Ottawa.
Hi, I actually don't have a question at this time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And then who do we have from CTV Ottawa? Is it Claudia or is it Jackie?
Hey, sorry, it's Jackie. My questions were answered already in the beginning, so thank you.
Thank you very much. So lastly, we will be going to Pat Ugochioni at Your Community Voice.
Sorry, my mute was on. Maybe this is for Councillor Moffatt because it's probably more of a political question, but where are we on waste to energy? I mean, the deal with Pasco, I think, ended at least 5 or 6 years ago. What has been done since then, and what studies are going to be done for that technology?
You're right, Plasco died on December 31st, 2014 as a result of a motion that I put forward. So in that regard, so this plan will cover that. We will look to that. And I think some of the things that we've looked at, obviously we won't have a final plan until 2023, but there is that kind of off-ramp discussion too on the residual waste strategy, which will come this fall. And what I think is important for council to look at is don't just look at one option. So we did the Plasco thing. We put our eggs in the one basket. It didn't work. It was an incredible deal. The contract was amazing for the city of Ottawa, but ultimately the technology failed. So in some of the things that we've done in recent months and looking at other jurisdictions, one of the examples that we found in Holland was that they have sort of in their recycling facility, they have a bit of an incubator for technology. So they invite private enterprise in to test out technologies to manage their waste. So they have those partners, and it's multiple partners that come in there and do that. So we have the luxury of having 2,000 tons of waste at Trailroad every single day. If we had multiple providers or technologies come forward and test out their technology using our waste, you could have that. It's a matter of where can we site them? How can it work? How does it fit in with phase 5 of the landfill? But certainly those are things that I think we need to consider and look at so that we don't fall into the trap of just going through one, looking at one provider and trying to decide, is that going to work? And then all of a sudden you find out 10 years later, it doesn't. So we can't afford that anymore. We can't afford to take that chance on one provider. We have to look at multiple. I think, on June 29th, I expect there will be people that come forward and speak to us about options that they have that they think they can do with the city. I know others have reached out to me in the past, some viable, some not viable, some who don't operate in Canada at all. And that's an important piece too, right? Because you can operate in Alberta, but it doesn't mean you can operate in Ontario. Ontario has some of the strongest regulations for waste to energy anywhere in the world. And I think that's a consideration too. We hear often things about what goes on in Sweden. Well, you can't compare that to what goes on in Ontario. Some of the waste energy facilities in Sweden are subsidized to the tune of 80 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's the thing that killed the Green Energy Act years ago. We can't get into a situation where all of a sudden it's going to cost taxpayers, an incinerator, just a standard incinerator now, the one that is in Durham region, was about $350 million of capital costs. The first 12 years of operation, it's $300 million extra in operating costs, which all gets borne by the taxpayer through the form of your garbage collection rate, which would, to Ottawa, it would double just to run that facility. So that's something that we have to consider as well, is that there's a cost to this. And I think in that triple bottom line discussion that Nicole was talking about, that's a piece of this. There's the environmental piece, the social piece, the financial piece. Those are all factors to consider when we talk about these types of things. But certainly we will be looking at waste energy as an option. And we need to figure out, what's the best fit and what can work in Ottawa.
So is one of the barriers environmental regulations? I mean, there are examples in Edmonton, and I think in Burnaby in British Columbia. Is it just there are different jurisdictions that we can't just sort of piggyback on their success?
Well, in Burnaby, it's not too different than what you'll have in Durham, right? It's a Covanta facility. So we know that. We know the cost of that. We know what that does. Is it as environmentally sound as they suggested it would be in Durham? I don't think so, personally. The system at Edmonton, I don't know where they're at. I don't know how operational it is to a point where they could actually come into Ottawa and just set up shop. Or do they pass the test in Ontario in terms of the regulations, the environmental regulations that the provincial government sets forward? So those, I don't know if those are apples to apples or apples to oranges comparisons when it comes to Ontario. So I think there's proven technologies which we can look at, but there's also emerging technologies that we know are out there that's could, again, we have a lot of waste. We have a lot. And if a company is willing to come forward and test out a technology, run a pilot project with us to a means where it comes to a point story where it would get to, they could be an option for us long term. I think we need to be open to that.
Great, thanks.
Thank you very much. I understand John Willing from the Ottawa Citizen is on the line. So John, if you have a question.
Hey, Kina, thanks. Sorry about getting on late. And sorry if these questions have been asked, but
Je suis désolé d'arriver en retard. Est-ce qu'on sait quelle sera la longueur finalement de la liste d'options retenues? Vous parlez de 72 options. Quelle sera donc la longueur de la liste d'options retenues? C'est une bonne question, John. Je ne peux pas vous dire combien d'options se retrouveront sur cette liste. Il va falloir déterminer cela au fur et à mesure. Alors, comme j'ai expliqué dans la présentation, on va élaborer 2 systèmes. Donc, un système modéré, un système plus agressif. Donc, on peut anticiper finalement, dans le cadre du système plus agressif, qu'il y aura peut-être plus d'options qui seront retenues. Alors, il va falloir qu'on pense finalement également à la conversation qu'on va avoir avec la collectivité. Alors, on doit reconnaître à nouveau qu'il y aura des répercussions financières.
As the aggressive system.
Great, thank you. Scott, sorry, did you want to say anything?
Well, I was just gonna say, if there's an option that we don't consider right now, it doesn't mean it doesn't get considered later as well. So the options are there. The whole point of this plan, and we said this from the start, that we're gonna look at everything. We're gonna consider every option we can possibly come up with. And there are some that we need to look at right away. And when the plan gets renewed in 5 years from the time that it's approved, then we could dive back into that list of options and look at other ones that maybe we don't look at now.
Yeah, Councillor, just on the topic of this moderate versus aggressive response, the word moderate is politically more palatable than aggressive. And I'm wondering, is it not a foregone conclusion that the city and council would take a moderate approach to waste management? And I feel like that's more the political culture or where the appetite would be at City Hall.
Well, I think moderate or aggressive really depends on the resident. Like you could have a resident that feels something's very aggressive that another person feels is actually, quite moderate. So like I said earlier, I think when Councillor Meehan was speaking, it'll be interesting to see the feedback we get from the public in the fall. I think we probably need to lean more toward aggressive, but that's me thinking of what's best for the city 20 years from now, 30 years from now. We obviously have municipal elections that come and go, and that's going to weigh heavy on some of the decisions we make. But I think there's some decisions that we need to make outside of that sort of election cycle mindset, looking more to the future. And I think that might be more on the aggressive side of things. So I don't think we can afford to do, nothing. Obviously, I think that's why the status quo option isn't really an option here. So if there's a blend between the moderate and the aggressive, might be a good spot for council to land on. But we'll see what those two scenarios look like, and council might have to make that decision to go a bit stronger than what some residents might want us to. But in the end, it's going to be better for the long-term viability of our landfill and of the taxpayer.
Great, thanks, Councillor. Thanks, staff.
Thank you very much. This concludes our media avail today. Merci à tous pour votre temps. Thank you everyone for your time. Have a great evening.
Recording stopped.
Thank you, Kina.
Yeah, thank you.